Like to call our panelists up for our first panel. And while they come up, we've got, I'll mention their names and ask Steve Lynch to come up from Burning Glass. And Steve is really one of the leading analysts of shifts in employment and implications for skills around. We've got Gerald Chertavian, who runs the organization Year Up, which is one of the most promising, effective programs to help opportunity youth have access to good jobs. And we got Mr. Müller-Eiselt from Bertelsmann, who has really got an incredibly insightful perspective on what are the implications of AI for life and work and the ethical implications. There's a character dimension here. How do we have to prepare ourselves with the right ethical preparation and character in young people to actually lead the use of technology in order to drive success, which will have implications for education as well. So I want to give a huge hand to our panelists. Before we go, let me just actually give a huge hand to all three of you. Thank you for coming. So we're going to have presentations from each of the three, and then we're going to have time. I'll pose some questions, and then have you all ask some questions. We'll have some time for discussion. And we're going to conclude this session in an hour and just under 15 minutes at 11:15 and go to the next session, which is going to deepen our focus on implications of nature and change of jobs for skills and competencies. But first, why don't we have Steve Lynch begin with a presentation, and then we'll go to the other two panelists. Advance slides. I think I'll ask David, if David's here, guidance for advancing slides. Okay. Over here.
Right. Bring it all up there. Hi, my name is Steve Lynch, and I am the Vice President of Workforce and Economic Development Services for a company based here in Boston called Burning Glass Technologies. And what we do at Burning Glass is basically we work to crack and map the genome for jobs. We develop software and solutions that focus on labor market data and analytics. And so that gives us some unique insights. I'll try and set the stage with what I'm talking about, but hopefully then do less presenting and more, I guess, reactive conversation. Now, when I say we think about a genome for jobs, jobs are unique. There's not a monolithic skill structure that cuts across any occupation writ large, either within the US or globally. We actually break down a job to try to understand the elements in a way that informs a deeper level of understanding about each specific role within the context of the industry and the sector and the geography and the time and place that it exists. And what we're doing, just to kind of peel back, that's not magic. We're gathering what we consider to be the currency of the job market. The ways that employers typically signal what they're looking for in terms of talent, the job market, is through job ads. And they exist in many places and formats, but we are aggregating them in a massive operation where we're basically getting online job ads from about 50,000 sources a day and trawling in all that data and coding it and making it mineable and searchable. And on the flip side, how do most job seekers signal to an employer the skills or the competencies that they have? Well, they create resumes and profiles of themselves in various places, and so we're also able to mine that data and using predictive analytics and software driven by things like statistical natural language processing, we're basically trying to extract information from those documents in context to allow people to get insights much more quickly without having to go out necessarily a very daunting task and have face-to-face conversations with 100,000 employers. That's kind of tough to pull off. But if in moments you can get some deep-level insights to make those conversations you do have more effective and more meaningful, that's what we're after. So we're translating skills of interest to you and competencies and requirements for roles into a common language, sort of creating a Rosetta Stone to enable better conversations between employers, job seekers, education and training providers. Those are the big three. And then the fourth estate for me is everybody else that plays a role somewhere in the middle in helping to move job seekers into occupations and marry talent with opportunity. So we're talking about the pace of change a lot today and what's going on with technology. It is rapidly evolving, and there's been a great democratization created by way of technology that enables people to do things that otherwise you might have to train a lifetime for. Yes, there are still significant access issues as to who has access to the cutting-edge technologies, and a great challenge for educators is a lot of the skills that will drive the changes in the workforce tomorrow aren't even publicly knowable. They may be tied up in R&D within specific firms right now. But as these things come to bear, what can we learn from them? And my message to you today is a lot of just breathe, relax, don't get overwhelmed by the pace of change. There are things we can do to prepare. Now, a theme I'll touch on today is outside of the automation risk that everybody seems to be talking about, particularly since the Osborne and Frey research that suggested maybe 50% of jobs will go away over 20 years. There's a larger issue going on, and automation sits within it. It's the hybridization of roles. To put it simply, employers today are looking for somebody that has skills from multiple different job domains, from areas that used to train separately. What may have been 3 or 4 different separate hires in the past, an employer wants in a single person. That's a challenge for education. It's also a great opportunity and a call for the importance of things like the liberal arts and cross-cutting skill development. These are things that you can prepare for when we talk about a hybrid job. You know, an example, a UI UX designer, somebody doing user interface, user experience. They need IT skills and design skills. A great example is a mobile app developer. It's a job that's growing in demand. It didn't exist 10 years ago. Who is the person that's a mobile app developer? Well, they're a marketing maven, a content expert in a specific area. They are a computer programmer. They also need some visualization and design skills. Is our educational system readily equipped to develop that talent? I like to say react to patterns of change, not the pace. Here's a listing of top IT skills, highest paying, fastest growing skills, hardest to fill IT skills we pulled at a point in time. I'm a former educator myself. I taught high school for 6 years. If I was looking at this 10, 15 years ago, I might have found this overwhelming. How am I going to stay on top of this? How am I going to keep all of this in the curriculum that I develop, in my pedagogy that I'm imparting to students? But what I've learned through experience is that's not the trick. These skills will change. This list that I put up here, I haven't given you the key to anything other than a view into a point in time. What you need to do is step back and say, what are the patterns that underlie these skills? Some of these skills relate to computer programming. Some of these skills relate to data visualization. There are certain functional things that we need to come to understand that are reshaping the job market. What I want you to know is teaching somebody coding skills does not mean that they will leave your high school and have their career all hunky-dory and taken care of for the next 30 years. But it's an important foundational element when we see that 15% of top quartile earning jobs emphasize coding skills. It's a building block in understanding behind these skills. What are the things like computational thinking? That's something that can be taught to all kids early on and provides an important foundation for moving forward. So yes, disruptive technologies do create winners and losers. It's not too early to plan for tomorrow, and these fears of a robot apocalypse are somewhat overblown. There will be a lot of creative destruction, new jobs that emerge that nobody's thought of along the way, and they'll be driven by the young people today, who, by the way, will have an easier time adapting than some of us will because they're growing up with this technology surrounding them. There's still important segments of our population that need to work that are facing real struggles now with the current pace of change, particularly older workers and the long-term unemployed. And we need to figure out how our educational system helps them as well. But for younger learners, there is a path forward. We see, this is driven from some of the data, some of the potential winners as we see it so far. There have been rapid increases in digital skill and analytics occupations, projected to grow about 28% Over the next 5 years, these are well-paying roles that will morph into many other roles. That insight comes from some research we did along with IBM for a quant crunch report we created. We've also seen, in just the past year, a 31% increase in demand for people with data visualization skills. The story that this is telling is, yes, there's a lot going on in technology, and particularly around this idea of a sea of data from ever more sources being gathered and pulled in. Every one of you probably has a cell phone. Well, that's also a sensor gathering data on you and what you do. That data is all being pulled in and used for different purposes, but the people who can help make it sing are still people. So we look and show, can we identify some of the changes? This is at an occupation level, and the fact that it's a little hard to see from here is fine, because again, it's not the Rosetta Stone in this slide. But we look and we're able to see for occupations or for specific skills, what does the projected growth and demand look like, and what is the experience that employers are having? So those things that are harder to fill and that are projected to grow, you probably want to pay attention to, and there's good news for educators. A lot of them lead to occupations where we also find incidences of employers not asking for specific certifications because they either don't exist or they're unaware of them. That is an opportunity, because the bachelor's degree is not the perfect piece of evidence that somebody's going to have the skills that an employer specifically needs. But in the absence of a better, more reliable piece of evidence, employers looking to hire will fall back on that and request it. And it will cost them in their bottom line when the skills they're looking for don't line up well with necessarily a 4-year program of study, when there is another option out there that could train somebody more effectively, more efficiently, and produce talent that would be less likely to attrite. So these are some of the things we're trying to shine a light on. The what about everyone else? I'd say, these lower automation risk occupations, it's counterintuitive for some people, but you see a lot of these are roles that live in the space of technology. So, many people would think that those would be the first roles to go in automation and a shift to robotics and AI, but actually that's not the case, because the technology empowers people to do things more efficiently, and it does represent a set of skills, but you still need somebody that can then apply that across teams, across business units, and that's where what we're finding is that there are skills that you can focus on and you can identify on to mitigate the risk of automation and to prepare for the hybridization of roles that's been ongoing for some time and will likely only exacerbate moving forward. Can we focus on the development of human skills like presentations, sales skills, project management, and add those on top of certain technical knowledge and abilities to produce employable folks? Just some interesting statistics that were cobbled together by us or by other sources around the pace of individual change that people need to be aware of. Here saying, young adults having about 7 different jobs in the ages of 18 to 28. And we've looked at a large volume of resume data, and we're finding that, yes, people are changing jobs very often, but unfortunately, while they not only change jobs, but actually change entire career fields, not a lot of people are experiencing significant wage gain. And that's an important story. One message I hope I can impart to you, 2 things I'm a little bit evangelical about are these. One, the shift in the world of work means that it's no longer about preparing for a job title. Job titles will come and go. The companies where they live will come and go. It's now got to be about a focus on skills and competencies. Skills and competencies promote economic resiliency. You can build off skills and competencies across multiple industries and sectors and in multiple domains. When you have them and when you develop them, those are your foundations for success. Chasing job titles or a salary next to a job title, I think, is a recipe for long-term failure, because you're missing how the world of work is changing. People will be in multiple fields, and the second thing is there's no such thing as a useless job. Absolutely none. Even the most dead-end bad experience can be one of the things you learn the most from. And so we have to find ways within the education community to tie those experiences back in and learn from them. Show somebody that their first entry-level retail job gave them some skills that if they're aware of them and know, okay, what's my personal gap, what needs to be added on this to be ready for the next career, actually gets people ready for success. I'll try to speed this up a bit and let you know there's a lot of talk out there about pathways. We do a lot of mapping of career pathways, a lot of ways that we visualize or stand up that information for people. But I want you to be aware of these three kind of different models. There are a lot of career pathways created by extremely well-intentioned and very, I think, with the greatest sense of purpose, folks in the education and training community that follow sort of a ladder approach. You know, I start with a role that I consider entry level, and then logically, based off of what I know about jobs, looking at, KSAs developed and descriptions of jobs provided by the federal government, this is the next logical step, and you should be able to go here, here, and here. And that's one way of approaching it. We started doing something at Burning Glass recently, really mining that resume data to say, outside of what employers say they're looking for and what intuitively should be a ladder approach to building up a career, what's the real world experience people are having? Looking at resumes, how did somebody get from one job to another? What's the real world career transitions they made? And doing this at a large scale for some very large companies who would give us access to their entire applicant tracking system worth of data over the years, and it looks closer to that plate of spaghetti. It's sort of all over the place. And because I heard early on references to experiential learning and work-based learning and project-based approach, it's really important to create those work attachments for learners. Because the reality is they will get oftentimes equal parts of value from what they learn in a classroom to the experiences they have in a work context. And we know that during the recession, so many young people did not have any work attachments. Their parents were competing for the same jobs that typically would have been jobs for young people. And so you've got a generation coming up that's going to have lower work attachments than ever before, and we've got to help them. We have to help manufacture those experiences for them. And then you sort of see the lattice model. If I can combine both approaches, can I start to put together a path that focuses on the skills that somebody's going to need to give them a better sense of how I move up within an industry and across and out and can follow my interests and my skills. Soft skills are still up there. I know it's politically incorrect to use that term. Actually, within Burning Glass, we typically call them baseline skills or foundational skills. They're also 21st century skills. Whatever the moniker is you put on these things, they matter. Employers ask for them, whether it's in tech roles or retail and service sector roles. They are emphasizing the need for these skills, and they are not a monolithic bundle. They vary by industry and sector, and they tend to request those baseline or foundational skills the most that are things that aren't part of the training, meaning people looking to hire hotel desk clerks. Those people are trained in dealing with the public and a lot of customer service things, but we see employers increasingly asking for computer and mathematics skills that are foundational, but not typically necessarily part of the training. So can we map this out and show people a core group of skills that we develop early that cut across multiple roles? And then can we add on them the layers and actually specific and granular information of here's what you need to add, here's a certification with value to enable you to move from one step to another. And again, we want to align this to need. Because this was an international event, we slightly modified a slide that used to exist at a state level. Originally, when we created it, it was like New York City versus Rochester versus somewhere else in New York. But here we made it US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Anywhere you look, the roles are different by regions in terms of what particular employers tend to emphasize. And so the beauty is we can tap into information to understand the skills that resonate the most with employers and also do some predictive analytics as to where that's going to move moving forward. I'll leave you with the thought. I think a lot of you may be familiar with the app Waze. I love it. I used it this morning driving in from the hinterland of Massachusetts where I live, about an hour and a half away when there's not traffic, or about 3 hours. It's the experience this morning. What Waze does, right, they take publicly available data that's always been there, things like street maps and, basic mapping information, but then they also lay over that user experience. And what they're trying to do is get somebody from point A to point B more quickly. Here's a better route for you based off of where you are right now and where you're trying to get to. And that's what we're trying to do at Burning Glass, only for careers. So can I understand where you are now? And by analyzing the experience of millions of other users and also taking publicly available data about the job market and then the proprietary data that we generate, can I show you from where you're at now what you need to do and what's the best route moving forward for you? And so happy to be here. Thanks for letting me be on the panel, and happy to answer questions as they come up.
Steve, thank you so much. We're actually... I'm going to have some questions and answers and discussion with Steve, and then after that, then we're going to go to a presentation after that from Ralph, and some questions and discussion on that. And after Ralph, we'll hear a brief reflection on what he's heard from Gerald, and I've got some questions for you too, Gerald. Ask a few questions, a couple questions, then open it up briefly. You, one of your core points was skills, not job titles. And that I gather that the point is, a compelling one, is jobs are going to change fast. And so if you prepare for a specific job, then the job will change. And if you got the particular job-specific skills, those won't be as relevant as the foundational skills that you need to navigate over time. And my question is on this, you also had, I thought, a really interesting phrase of patterns, not pace. That it's the pattern, not the pace of change that matters. And I'm curious, let me tell you my takeaway on that and just see if you agree, disagree, why. Like, I feel like if my understanding of what you're saying is that the pace of change is not significant in the sense that every high school educator has got to keep up with what exactly is the latest job and therefore make sure the curriculum in high school is adapting to that new job every 6, 12, or 18 months. But it's rather the pattern, is a very different pattern I'm gathering of work than has happened before, and that there are some underlying foundational skills that are needed, and that is different from what we had before. And my sense also is that pace actually does matter in the sense that if we have to be, if we tried to just get ready for one job, it wouldn't work, but that there is a fundamental shift that's happening, and you've got a hypothesis, and others do, about what are the fundamentally different knowledge and skills needed in order to be able to succeed in a rapidly changing economy. Is that right? I mean, is that how you think about it? And why or why not? And then I would like a minute to get into building on what you said here. What do you think right now are the core kind of knowledge and skills that high school level educators ought to be focused on given that?
Yeah, I think my larger point is there are so many specific skills out there with very specific names. Right now I think we're tracking about 17,000 discrete skills with about 80 or 90,000 variants on them and translating them in a simple language. To think that any educator is going to stay on top of that and know the soup du jour of the moment, that specific mix of skills, it's nice that you can tap in and find that out. But what's more interesting when I talk about the pattern is, what do those skills have in common? And so increasingly, what we see, and that plays out in two important points. One, we definitely see that jobs, not just in the US, but globally, don't require a monolithic skill set. They want people trained in multiple different areas, but there's also an increase within certain fields of specialization. For instance, not all engineers do the same thing. There's not people just hiring people to do web development generally all day long, or Java skills being the key. There's always something more specific that applies to a domain, what I'll call domain knowledge. And so the importance is, I think, for educators to understand, okay, well, what are, the things that we know generally about skills within this rapid pace of change? And one of the things we know is digital fluency, particularly for younger audiences, is absolutely critical. That when we look at what we would define as middle skill jobs, so at least 20% of the jobs targeting somebody with less than a BA, paying at least $15 an hour, say, as a proxy for a living wage, About 80% of those require a core suite of digital fluency skills, and this is not high-level programming. It's not, SQL and Pig and Java skills. It's basic office production software, your Microsoft Excel, but a certain suite of digital fluency that if you don't have that, the roughly 20% of jobs that remain that are middle skill jobs actually don't pay a living wage, and we see that those jobs are phasing out. They're disappearing much faster than the others. So that would be sort of one bucket. I also used earlier computational thinking as a basic building block. I mean that's as much about process of thought as exposure to certain mathematics and in tech fundamentals that underlies further skill development down the road. Coding skills is another popular bucket that people will point at. When we see these things pop up again and again across roles in multiple industries and sectors, when it gets past a tipping point, you can say, okay, these are things that are foundational. They should be core to the development of curriculum and education because they're cutting across a lot of areas. This is a pervasive change in the way that work gets done, and they're important enough that we should make them a priority. But then there'll always be that element down the road where the development of a career, it's really, you're building a structure. It's not like a trophy where somebody sits on top of one building block and then they're done. So developing those experiences and the experiences that people have, and to the earlier point, no job is a useless job, taking those foundational building blocks and then applying them in multiple different areas is how you, I think, develop the additional skills you need to move along and find your niche and interest in the past.
Steve, thank you so much. I'm going to ask in a minute for a comment or question from Ralph or from Gerald before we go to the audience. So Gerald, Ralph, get ready if you've got a question you'd like to pose or a comment you'd like to make, knowing that Ralph will be giving a presentation soon. But the one question before you do that I'd like to ask you, Steve, is it's interesting. You're saying there's kind of you looked at what's in common across these different types of skills and jobs. Not that every educator ought to track or system ought to track the changing 150 different sort of sub-skills. And you mentioned digital fluency and computational thinking, which is process thinking, like our school from Tennessee was talking about earlier, and others. Have you looked at what are sort of foundational, I guess in order to be able to acquire those? And just one quick example I was struck by, I was talking to somebody doing a coding academy for software coding, I think in Washington State recently, and I was asking them what the entry standards were for them to accept students into this coding academy that afterwards they could get great jobs. And it's interesting, he said nothing about coding. What he said was, need people to be able to formulate and defend a logical argument and have strong logic skills. He said it needed people to have strong communications, including verbal communications and written communications, needed kind of a certain maturity, and needed to know math, particularly algebra, very well. But then said, hey, then we can actually do the coding. But they said, without like that kind of problem-solving, underlying logic, those other skills, that was one program. I'm just curious, have you looked, given the constellation of skills needed for those jobs, then what are the antecedents or foundations that are needed in order to be ready for acquiring those?
Yep. And for us, that's, again, what we would call the baseline skills. And employers actually do a very good job of signaling, sometimes better than the technical skills, what they're looking for in that vein. But there are, particular skills, and to me, a competency is basically a skill applied, or the ability to apply a skill. So they're signaling pretty well what they're looking for. And I think when you can identify what are the things that make you successful, or those antecedents that need to be there to, I guess, have the right mix to then succeed in the work in a given industry or sector, yeah, you can absolutely then lay over that the technical knowledge. We do, a lot of work to build those out. We've actually got a report you can access on our website just for free. It's out there, but we looked at baseline skills across industries and sectors and kind of mapped them out as to what mixes were more in demand or more less in demand to, sort of lay that out. So there's not, kind of an off-the-cuff answer of, well, yes, for these industries, but that's actually written into the
Great.
Into the research.
Thank you so much. And Ralph, Gerald, we'll get to your presentation moment, but first, a comment or question based on what Steve shared. Please.
Yeah, maybe, can you hear me? Or is that not really, right? Is it on? Okay. Yeah, maybe just one general remark. I mean, it was in a baseline, Steve mentioned, well, I mean, we will get new jobs as we always got when there were revolutions, like the Industrial Revolution, electricity, all that. And so I just wanted to make that one point here, that we basically this time maybe not know whether this will be the case again. I mean, every revolution was kind of an evolution, so it always took you 50 to 60 years to see productivity wins, to see growth. And this time it might be different. We all don't know because digital scales much faster than it was the case with the steam engine, for example. So, and I just wanted to make that point here. So we should not take for granted that there will be new jobs just, as a natural development. But I think this is why Steve's work is so important in this field, because now we not only work on the demand side with the digital revolution, or it does not only touch the demand side, but it really also touches every individual on the supply side. So we can see what competencies everybody has, and then we can match them to labor market demands. So this is a big opportunity, but on the same time, as I said, we should not take it for granted. And in the end, it might be that we need certain political measures when it comes to our welfare system that might need certain reforms. And this is just from a more global perspective. Right. I just wanted to embed that in the discussion here.
Thank you, Alf. No, we don't know. I mean, right now, what we I think know is that there's this shift in what's needed in order to access good jobs and have a shot. We don't know. There are economists differ in debate. Are we going to have enough good jobs or not? As an aside, it's not our expertise. My view is there's a good chance we won't. And I think that some people talk about this is not an American Chiefs educational policy, but when people talk about universal basic income, I think that's kind of a non-starter because it's you need work in order of dignity, and I think that would be politically a non-starter, at least in the United States. But I think over time we might not want to look at more things like universally available work, that anyone who wants to work hard, get ahead, would have support for that. And I think things like an infrastructure bill could help with that. But regardless of the uncertainty about what the availability of good jobs will look like, we know that what the good jobs will require is different than what was required in the past. So we know that's an important piece of the problem, although Ralph, you, I think, helped give us a part of that broader context. Gerald, do you want to at this point give a comment on what you've heard so far, or a question that you'd ask to Steve?
And first of all, we work closely with Brennan Glass on a number of research projects, so value the work, the thought process, and have made some interesting conclusions around how work's changing. I just go back and think, okay, I've been involved in public education on boards of education, so I've seen the system. I've also been an executive director of a program that's trained 20,000 young people in 1 year to go from poverty to professional careers that average $40,000 a year. These are high school grads. 50% have dropped out of college after a semester, 50% haven't yet gone to post-secondary. So I think sometimes so there's a data point that 20,000 young people all over the country within a finite period of time are going from poverty to a job that pays a livable wage. So I can never be convinced that this isn't possible, or that there's something inherently wrong with our young people who can't acquire the skills they need to actually hold down a decent job.
By the way, that's a stunning success. I know for you it was expected, but it actually does demonstrate that success in this rapidly changing economy is possible at some scale.
Appreciate that. Now, interestingly, 96% of our students tested into remedial mathematics, yet we've placed 600 individuals full-time into fund accounting. What job might you think would need a bit of math? Fund accounting, right? At State Street Corporation. Not once in the last decade has State Street come back and said, you guys can't do math. You're 96% tested into remedial mathematics. So there's some really interesting stuff going on right now around what actually are we doing in high schools. And I heard some from folks earlier in the day, you all are probably doing a lot of the stuff we need to do. Just hearing, and there's a gentleman over here who spoke talking about experiential learning, networking. So my guess is a lot of you folks get it. The question is, if our system doesn't figure this out, this will be a double disadvantage to those who are least served today in our country. And I would argue that the pace now will matter more, because I think Tom Friedman writes very clearly around exponential versus linear pace of change, and we're in a different era around pace. It's also, and again, just bear with me, do a little test for me for a sec. How many people raise your hand if you have a 4-year degree? Keep your hand up if you got it between the ages of 18 and 22. Okay, so just look around the room. It's about 90% of hands. You can put your hands down. 90% of hands are up. If you ask the same two questions of any 100 adults in the United States of America, the answer is 8 hands would be up, right? So we did a disservice to the country saying college for all, and we made the assumption of 4-year college for all was the only mantra of what was acceptable. Yet you got this interesting data point of 20,000 young people in 21 weeks of training and a 6-month internship earning livable wages and then continuing their education, learning, relearning skills. And so I wonder really hard, what really are we preparing those young adults for in high school? How important is career readiness, for which in Massachusetts we do not have standards or assessments to understand career readiness, when 50% of the people who go to college in this country work 30 hours a week? That's not low-income individuals. It's all people. Know what the number would be for low income. So now we're thinking, wait a minute, what do our systems need to do? And I bet there are people right now listening to me saying, yep, I got it, that's what we do, that's how our school is thinking about it. We are in some serious trouble if we don't figure out systemically how do we deal with this for the majority of folks who got to start making money at the age of 18 when they graduate from high school. Going to school full-time is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. We see the failed one-semester wonders, thousands and thousands, and it's cruel what happens to young people. And we need to think differently about setting them up to concomitantly do pay-worthy and credit-worthy things at the same time, such that they can actually feed their bellies and feed their brains at the same time. Not as you're an anecdote or you're an interesting figure. It is the de facto way young people will be consuming pay-worthy, credit-worthy is concomitantly. So I do worry more, not at the global picture, but when you start to look at who's served, who's not, who has social capital, who doesn't,
Absolutely.
who has access to the career readiness they need, who doesn't. My goodness, this actually is more scary to me than I think I've heard, and I think we have to get systemic change to address it.
Gerald, when you look at, there's a post-secondary discussion that I planted the seed for this morning about what might parallel a 4-year college, but for educators here from the United States and from across the world, from places like Singapore and Switzerland and Germany and South Korea and Spain, Canada, as well as from our educators here from places like Tennessee and Colorado and Louisiana and Georgia and Texas and elsewhere. So given what you've learned, you're talking to some of the leading educators across the world. You've seen students come out of high schools. What do you think, given what you've seen it takes to be ready for good jobs that you're equipping young people at in a very effective way? It's one, there are a lot of solutions, but this is one very effective one. What do you need from high schools? What are you looking for? Coming out of high school, what are those kind of core knowledge, skills, orientations that you'd like to see coming out of high school that would equip young people to be ready for the kind of work that you do?
So I would say there's, on the professional side, foundational skills. If you have the right attitudinal, behavioral, and communication skills, I'd say the new ABCs, attitude, behavior, communication skills, 90% of our employers will tell you, as long as that person can learn and is willing to learn, will handle a lot of it. Now, we would go above that and give them basic technical skills, as you talked about, office applications, basic technical fluency, so they would understand that. Would focus hard on communication skills, business communication skills, and then I guess tell them that learning, unlearning, and relearning is the new post-secondary reality. Bite-sized degrees is almost, I think, 20, 30 years' time, we'll look at that and smile. When Harvard currently is planning a 60-year curriculum, in the continuing school of education, they're working on a 60-year curriculum because they believe that the degree is finite, as opposed to we're going to have people 30, 40, 50 years old unlearning things and relearning things. So how do we help in high school to establish that reality for young people, and what experiences allow them to be learning, unlearning, relearning at pace? Because if the employer has that, they would say, step out of the way. We're more than happy to work with that person if they come with the attitudinal, behavioral communication skills that are required for knowledge-based white-collar work.
So we're going to have 2 days for discussion, but I'd like to now go to participants here to see if we've got 1 or 2 questions that you all would like to pose so far before we go to Ralph's presentation. Questions? Yes.
My name is Jeff Stroll. I'm the Director of Research at Georgetown University Center on Education in the Workforce, and I've worked a bit with Burning Glass, not Steve in particular. And my question is about the value, I seldom need a mic, but is about the value of the information on internet postings and resumes, is that there's a lot of evidence out in the field that there's a small war going on between resume preparation and what's going on in an ad. So you got EEO-1 requirements on the ad side, you got resume helpers, and so there's a little bit of noise factor going on there. And I'm going to take that then to the skills gap. Are you able to help these people understand what skills don't get you a job? So you've got 5 applicants applying for one job, 4 of them get rejected, 1 gets the job. Can you actually differentiate what the skills are that are being rejected and are truly getting to a job in an environment where some people are losing their job because they don't pass a drug test? So how do we sort this out to get some usable information in a reliable fashion that's really going to help folks sort out this skills gap issue?
Yeah. 2-part answer to that. So first of all, at Burning Glass, we're not running a constant mining of resumes that are just out there. So we, in terms of where resume data tends to come from that we work with, it's with engagements with particular companies. And so there's nothing that we then turn around with personally identifiable information and data and throw that out there. But because there are hundreds of millions of resumes going through our engines, because like a company like Manpower or something, any resume they're going to touch goes through an engine, we get great insights on that, and we're just really starting in the past year or 2 to really look at what are the quality issues and what can be seen from that. But I know when you look within a particular company and you have that closed pond of data on the workers, and you can look at the characteristics and then try to hone in as to what made 4 candidates accelerate in their career versus others. And it's not always going to be a hard, easy to identify data point that ties back to a credential or something, especially when you get into issues of grit and perseverance and more personal qualities. But there are certainly insights that can be gained from that. Having that closed environment makes it more possible to do that analysis. But really, when you ask that question, I'm glad you did, Jeff. I think there's a really important point that I was thinking of as Gerald was talking as well, and that's within the world of education. Just think, I know my experience when I was teaching in secondary school, how the structure was built, how the system was built. What is the level of staffing and the level of resources that goes to student advising and guidance and all of these things? Because I would argue that most teachers I've ever met, regardless of subject or discipline, are covering a lot of these baseline skills within their curricula, and they're doing a darn great attempt at surrogate parenting in a lot of respects, in the development of character and teamwork and respect and work ethic to the best of their abilities. But also there's a piece of the great success that the young people that you help have. They also have somebody guiding and doing that introduction to companies, developing these opportunities and giving a handoff and guidance along the way. And that's so important to getting this right, is what are we putting in place within our education systems, and what resources are we putting there to not just develop those new ABC skills, but also help make the connection in introductions to the
Steve,
world.
thank you so much. No, when we think about what the systemic implications are for schools, there's curricula, there's professional development, there's advising, there's work-based learning, there's connections to new types of post-secondary. This really is, again, there's things that each of you can do in your schools and your school systems, but there are things that you need to be at the table shaping what are the responses, including advising is an example of that. If there is one more pressing question now, we'd love to hear it, and then we're going to go to Ralph's presentation. We're going to have more after that. Yes, please.
I'm not sure if it's on. Yeah, it is on. So I'm a graduate with a pure chemistry degree.
Just name and organization.
Name, sorry, Adrian von Vrede-Jervis from the Bavarian International School in Germany. I'm a graduate with a pure chemistry degree. You've mentioned that, and I kind of worry that would be a useless thing to have done now. And so it's going back to your point that there's no such thing as a useless job, but is there such thing as a useless degree?
I don't think so, but what you need, I think, to make any learning useful is context and information. So again, I think there's a lot of interconnections that map things. I was a political science major in undergrad here in Mass at Holy Cross. I am not creating candidates in my basement, although maybe I should. But, you know, and then I went on to law school and did that for a while. You know, I took an extremely wonderful, circuitous career path to get to where I am today. So no, I don't think there's useless education. But I do think there's a lot of absence of information, and the stakes are so high given the cost, particularly once you get beyond free and public education. You know, if any one of you wanted to start at a business and you went to the bank, they're going to ask you for a business plan before they give you $1 to fund your idea. And yet every one of our kids can go out and plunge themselves into debt with no plan and not a lot of information, because where do most people learn about the careers that they have in their heads? What they see in their neighborhoods or what they see on TV. And there's just not that many opportunities to be a CSI or a video game designer. And if you don't get exposed to ever what's going on in advanced manufacturing or what's going on in industries that the moms and dads and grandparents raising kids on your street have, then that's a real tough place to start from.
So it's a great question. We'll have more discussion in the next 2 days about this. I would just say, and Jeff from Georgetown will talk about this, it does seem like there is data saying that there are some useless degrees, or at least degrees that are much less useful than others. And that doesn't mean, by the way, in my own view, I think the data is also clear, a very strong liberal arts degree from a top college can be incredibly helpful in terms of the deep critical thinking skills needed. But I think when we see, and Jeff can comment more on this, when you look at a lot of programs, a lot of general education programs, I think a lot of community college programs that actually are not focused on workforce but are more generic general education, I think some degrees out there are not that useful. And I think that thinking about what the pathways are post-high school that actually are genuinely and meaningful, that are more useful than others. But knowledge is obviously clearly important, which, so I don't think this comes at the expense of just deeply acquired knowledge, but I do think there are more and less useful degrees. Eager to hear from Georgetown on that in the next panel. But right now we're going to go to Ralph, because we've got a great presentation from Ralph, which will help locate this in a broader context for us, with implications for our character, our countries, and education as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, thank you for the invitation, first of all, and I'm happy to be here. Ralf Müller-Eiselt from German-based Bertelsmann Foundation. This is for those of you who might not have heard of it, basically Europe's largest think tank. We have about 350 people working in different policy fields, and also have a little daughter here based in DC that does a lot of interesting and hopefully helpful transatlantic work. So I think my role here today is, as John just alluded to, a bit to broaden the scope and not only talking about the labor market issues concerned with education, but really ask how society is impacted by this new brave world, if you want. And so what I like to do in the next about 10 minutes is really just to, and start with that, just apologize for the slides if they might seem a bit odd. They were 16:9 designed, 16 by 9. So, but anyway, I think you get the most important messages. So I'll talk about what happens when machines judge people and how algorithms impact societies and education. And since I'm coming from the field of education, I did a lot of work in digital education. I try to combine these things, and I hope to relate kind of better to your work as well, combining the new artificial intelligence world with some examples examples from the world of education. So when we talk about these things, there is something like AI you might know from the new movies. For a lot of people, it just kind of sounds like science fiction. And so here's my first message for you. This is not the case anymore. Artificial intelligence, algorithms, they do impact every individual every day on our life as a society. There are just some examples. May be in traffic, was already mentioned. Also in the legal system, I come to an example in a second, or just the work field, education as well. So and the big question then is, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence serves society? And this is one of, I think, the most important question we have to tackle globally right now. So just to give you an idea and an example, and you might have heard of those partly, but just let's jump into New York City, city most of you might be familiar with. So what happens on a normal day in New York City? So algorithms are, for example, used to decide which high school your children will attend. They might also be used to see how teachers are evaluated, and then, of course, in the consequence, who might be fired or promoted. Algorithms, artificial intelligence systems, software is used to direct police squads, where and how often they show patrol. They are used to see which buildings are checked for safety hazards, and even they are used by judges who decide, based on software suggestions, which prisoners might be released early and which not. So this is just the full spectrum of artificial intelligence use in a daily life. And since I promised to resonate or to relate to your daily life, I now have just tried to transfer that a bit to education, and start with giving you an idea of like 6 potential added values of technology in education. And so first of one, but with a picture always, so the most kind of easy one, you might all have heard of the MOOCs movement, so the massive open online courses. The idea behind that was to democratize education, to give more access. Yeah? In the end, it turned out that this is only true for those who are kind of gifted or very motivated. So the MOOC population says 90% are white, wealthy, and well-educated. So, but at least for those who are gifted and motivated, democratization, like at least better access, is one important value added. So the second one, then probably, in my opinion, the most important one, is to personalize education, something that will resonate to most of you. So how can we really make sure that we have individualized learning for all? Third one, we don't talk that much about, but I think is important as well. So talking about gaming, gamification, to how to overcome motivational barriers. This is also important for those who will not follow the path you have decided for their individualized learning. If they just don't want to learn, you might need other measures. So gamification might be one of those. A fourth one, there's no teacher in the middle anymore. Interaction, so we've just called that WeQ, might beat IQ, so the power of peer-to-peer learning, another important value added. Then we're talking about orientation, the guidance through the jungle of opportunities. This is basically what Steve touched upon, very detailed. And the sixth one, then also something having to do with your work, Steve, the matching process. So how we make education more valuable and to match supply and demand. So these are 6 potential added values of digital education. And now let's see how many of them wouldn't be possible without data and algorithms. So, and just think about it. I mean, you might democratize education to at least a certain extent without data, without algorithms, without a too much complicated software system. And the interaction part as well might be possible. But all other dimensions, personalization, gamification, orientation, and matching, is highly dependent on algorithms. And so what does that in the end mean for our society and for education? And I just want to kind of give you 3 examples before I close what it really means to use such software in education. And so I think my main point I want to make here is that there is really a fine line between promise and peril of the use of algorithms and software systems in education. So on the one hand, we might use algorithms, artificial intelligence, software systems to strengthen social equality, but at the same time, this is the fine line, it can be used for weakening it. And I just give you 3 examples that hopefully give you a sense of what I mean by that. So first examples, we can use software to support or select. So what do I mean by that? So one opportunity, so we talk about personalized learning here, personalized content, pathways is, as also examples in the US do, Arizona State University, for example, they have developed a software called eAdvisor, and really, since using this software could make it possible that their dropout rates decreased significantly, I think by 60% or something like that. So this is really a good use of algorithmic decision making. So on the other hand, there are some for-profit universities, I don't want to mention them detailed here, but they can also use basically the same software system to do predatory ads and to address the vulnerable people. So, for example, those who just went through a divorce or might, have dropped out from college. So, and they might then directly address those people to really target the vulnerable customers, if you want. And so what we see here is that an algorithm as such is neither good nor bad, but it's always as good or bad as the ethical norms you put in, or as the humans who decided upon this software system who designed them. So first example, support or select. Another one, you can, by using artificial intelligence, software systems, democratize or discriminate. So what do I mean by that? So just mentioned this example from New York City, where they introduced a software system to distribute students according to their wishes and potential to schools, regardless of race and religion and other personal characteristics. And the interesting thing is that among parents, they are very, very confident with this new system, so much more happy than before. Obviously, really a good system where they could overcome certain, at least felt discrimination in this process. And another example, this time from Europe, from France, where the opposite happened, where they used a software system to distribute students for universities. So what happened here was that it wasn't really by intention, but there was one important element in the code. It was the zip code. And the zip code, in the end, decided very highly upon whether a student would get to university or not. And so the closer you were from the university, the bigger your chances to get this university. But the problem was that the highly centralized French system then favored those who were already close to Paris. So in the end, it really reinforced existing social inequalities. And so it was not the intention, but it just happened in the end. So student association went to court, and in the end won. So now Macron, the new president, one of the first things he did was to abolish this system again. But it was already introduced. So learning here is an algorithm can only be as good as its maybe also unintended consequences. And what is also very important, it can only be acceptable if it's transparent, at least when we talk about public sphere here in education. So on the third and last example, I want to bring to the table empower or exclude. So here we're talking about matching, again, those examples Steve touched upon. So if you do it good, you can really use such software system as competency-based recommendation systems, and this can overcome a lot of the deficiencies of paper-based degrees. We just talked about that. But on the other hand, it can also lead to something I would call algorithmic monoculture. So if, for example, Walmart uses the same algorithm as their competitors do, and if you are excluded from the Walmart list once you apply, and the same happens to you with all other competitors, then the issue is, in the end, it wasn't like individual humans who decided not to invite you for a job interview, but it was the software that excluded you already before a human saw your application. So, and then this kind of algorithmic monoculture can, in the end, lead to kind of let's say, effective exclusion from the labor market at all. So, and this is also an issue we definitely need to think about and to tackle. I would put it as an algorithmic system can only be as good as the diversity as it embraces. So we have seen there are a lot of sources for error. So it can be wrong intention. It can also be like unintended consequences, so even well-designed algorithms can produce bad results. It can be this kind of lack of diversity that leads to certain issues, and also one-sided feedback mechanisms. So if you can't falsify a software system, this is also a very important point we should look at. I can't go into detail here, but just wanted to give you this overview of usage of artificial intelligence in software systems in education. So, want to finish by this question. Do you think there's cause for concern here? I suppose so. But I want to leave it and frame it a bit, hopefully a bit more positively in the end. We should always be aware that artificial intelligence is definitely not God-given, but it's designed by human beings and therefore can be shaped. So we hopefully get this kind of future or not that one. So what is the future we want? So my future, and I want to finish with this thought, is definitely a future where we have a world of man, not a world of man against machine, but a world of man with machine. And so I think we should really use digital, definitely digital disruption for more humanization in such sense. So let's use software, artificial intelligence, where we can make use of all technological opportunities, as long as we as humans have a final say in determining the goal of the technology's use. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ralph.
Maybe just
If you
switch
wanna
back.
go
Okay,
there, and
perfect.
We'll ask some questions. Very helpful. In fact, that last theme to me underscores that one of the first points of the day is that there are optimists and pessimists, but in the end, what AI, whether we adapt to these changes, kind of depends on kind of what we collectively do. And the question is, can we educate our young people to be have the power to create, as we heard from the Tennessee school earlier, and help shape what's going to happen? And can we as educators work across other sectors to inform systemically what happens? Because a lot of these things are not going to be informed by any one actor, and there is a need for, just like our students be team players, for us to be team players with other sectors. But I think this power of us, we collectively, to shape is a key theme. One question for Ralph before I open it up to other comments and questions. When you look at the challenges and opportunities you described, you've got a room of some of the top, especially high school level educators from across the US and many countries. What are you most looking for from high schools to equip our high school students to be drivers of making sure that AI is servicing our shared values as opposed to being just inadvertently at the whims of how AI is developed without that kind of foresight and planning?
Well, I think so. There would be many things I could answer for that, but the most important thing I think is that educators and school systems should make sure that every student really gets a sense of this digital world. So digital literacy, data sovereignty, being able to understand how the internet works, what is an algorithm, yeah, all these things. This is not yet part of all curriculums at school. And so I think this is a very basic thing that does not, in the end, really have to do a lot with what I talked about, but it's a basic foundation. School systems are, I think, really obliged to prepare students for this digital age. Since only if that is the case, a student can early on really think about the responsibility you have, for example, then later as a software developer, right? So it's a lot of ethical questions that are concerned here. And if you do not learn and discuss this early with your peers, it's very difficult to get this sense of social responsibility for designing software systems later on. And it's not that everybody needs to become a coder or a software developer, but at least getting an understanding how this system works would be already so helpful for all society.
It's fascinating, Ralph, both the notion of the focus on the development of responsibility and ethics, blended with understanding of digital literacy and data in order to really empower our young people to sort of shape the future. That is really helpful. Let me ask, let me go to the audience actually and ask for a question or two from the audience. Yes.
One of the things that I wonder, because you hear some of these changes, and the first thing, it feels alarming. But one thing I notice about the kids in my school, for example, at the high school age, is there seems to be a greater emphasis, not so much anymore on earning a higher paycheck, and it seems to be shifting more towards contribution. And it seems like with kids having this baseline level of technological skill, which many of them are acquiring, and I believe will acquire before they ever hit the 4-year degree, or maybe not even go after the 4-year degree anymore. My wondering is in this new world, will thought and contribution and this shared sense of community, maybe kids won't need what we would consider middle-class status. They'll need less, because they'll be thinking and contributing more, like more value will be put on the experience with technology and things like that versus having things in what we kind of considered as a capitalist society growing up. You have to have more and earn more to be considered, really a piece vitally contributing to the community.
Who wants to take that?
There's a little to add.
But I mean, I think it's an interesting thought. It could be considered euphemistic, potentially. I would say that, you look at the happiness factors, right? It says you get $75,000, you have a complete upward trend in happiness. Above $75,000 of earnings, you get kind of a marginal increase in happiness. In fact, it actually doesn't go up that much. So I would argue there's probably some level of being secure that we all seek. Security for ourselves, our children, our families, knowing what we're going to eat, live. So there's some level there that I think is, at least research would say, is geared towards being happy around in earnings. So I'm not sure how that manifests, whether we want less things, but the fact is what allows us to get to a basic level of stability when we live in a country where half of all the people in the United States couldn't find $400 in a crisis. Can you imagine how it would feel to go to bed every night when you are one flat tire or transmission problem away from bankruptcy, or you've got to sell things or go into debt? That's half of all the Americans in the United States of America. So there's something about the economic insecurity that's gripping this country that I think we have an obligation, as John said, to allow people to get in the game well enough to satisfy those basic economic needs. I would love to think we shifted our stance as a culture that sadly values perhaps some of the wrong things rather than community. I would love to think this generation is more thoughtful than those of us who grew up in the 80s, slightly different mindset. But there is some level of security that I think we owe it to our young people to enable them to get in the game. And right now we're not doing that for vast swathes of this country, leading to very challenging outcomes. Look at the opioid crisis, and what do you think the driver underneath of the opioid crisis is? And I would argue hopelessness and economic insecurity have been much as driver of that as anything else. And so that to me, we have to get our American citizens and others to that point, or else I think it potentially divides us more than we care to believe right now.
I'm gonna take one more question, and just while we're going to that, whoever's got, if we've got another question, and if not, then I'm gonna make a comment and then ask. Jeff's on the next panel, so we're gonna go to Jeff on the next panel. But I would just say on that, at the beginning of the day, I asked you to think about 3 questions. One, what's the purpose, as you'd articulate to an actual student and family, what's the purpose of your schools? For me on this, like, I don't know, my recap might be helping a student make a living and make an impact. I mean, I do think young people today want to contribute and make an impact in huge ways when it's admirable, and actually, even through their work, they want to make an impact. But I also think making a living and having a chance to sort of determine your future and help support your family so you can is crucial. So I would think about both high school and post-secondary education all in the service, in my view, of making a living, making an impact. But you all be reflecting on how you're thinking about your missions and purposes. Number 2, I asked you to think about what you know about the change in the workplace. And 3, what are the implications for skills and competencies given the evolution of work and the future of work that's hitting now. In the next panel, we're going to actually go even deeper on the implications for skills and competencies, but I guess I'd like to close this panel by asking each panelist to say what's the most important point you want to leave with this group today, or what's the core foundational knowledge or skill you don't want these high school educators to forget as they're trying to equip young people for an unpredictable and changing world. Pick one of those 2 for quick answers from each of the 3, and then we'll close the panel. Ralph, please.
Yeah, maybe just start. So just one fundamental thing we should talk about is I think we have seen we need to reform education. We need to really do something new at schools, but there is a certain time lag, and this is really crucial in education. I think educational systems change as slowly as no other system in the world. So, and this I really want to leave to you to really, for these 2 days you're having ahead, really think about how your ideas, how your innovative ideas can be scaled to the system. So this would be really very helpful for not only the American, but also, as the name says, for a global learning network. So how to overcome this inherent time lag built into educational systems and their change. This would be the big question and hope I would have for you for the next 2 days.
Thank you, Ralph, very much. Gerald?
I would think that high schools will have to think a lot more about awareness, exposure, and immersion activities related to the world of work at a much earlier age, middle school, elementary, high school. And so the question is, how do we see ourselves as inherently connected in our K-12 system to the world of work in ways that actually allow those young adults to be learning relevant things, understanding choices, making more informed decisions, and how do we create true standards and true assessments so that when you say you graduate from high school, you actually are better prepared to make those choices, to understand what you might like to do, to know the relevancy of studying algebra because you need it for certain types of mathematics, computer engineering. So how do we take something that's been, we say college and career readiness is basically a throwaway word. How do we make career readiness as real as we might make mathematics or English in our K-12 system, given the realities that Americans have to work at a much earlier age to support themselves?
Great. Thank you, Gerald. Steve?
Yeah, I think I'd go to my earlier point about noticing patterns, and I'm noticing some within this conversation. So, I mean, it's what's interesting to me we brought out, the nature of work is changing, okay? And what employers are looking for in terms of talent is changing, and there's an information gap there that exists, both for educators to know what that is and how to adapt to it, and great challenges of how do I change my systems to adapt to it, and for job seekers, whether they're young or old, there's real challenges of how do we get them that information to make good decisions. Along with the informational piece, because it's not just about what's needed for the jobs, it's also the very process you go through to get a job. How do you find a job? The things that our colleagues were referring to around AI is coming into play now, around screening candidates, around recommender engines. So how do I even learn about an opportunity that something thinks is a good fit for me? We can't figure it all out in the minute I have to wrap up this answer. But I think what's important is making all of those people aware of this, giving them the ability to know the system and the rules and the machines and the technologies that set the ground rules that they're playing into so that they can make informed decisions. And finally, I think behavior matters and you influence it so much, particularly in the secondary school level. And I think imparting to young people some hope and knowledge that their decisions can impact their experience in this future of work. I know I, for one, don't go to restaurants that don't have people and just want to shove the little machine in front of me. I'm walking around on a left foot with a stress fracture in it. I saw a radiologist the other day, and it takes a week and a half to get to the MRI. I want there to be people that I can question, and I don't think I would play into the system that freezes the people out of it. Your preferences and the choices that they make will still very much drive, and I think the woman over here talked about quality and experience that they have is still very much going to influence their experience with the future of work. So you have a little more control than what the pessimist might suggest.
So thank you. And so before you give a hand, I'll just say this has been a great introduction foundation for our 2 days. We hope to help you reflect on those initial questions and that you're posing to yourself and to others. After we come back from the break, we're going to go deeper into a panel on the implications of all of this for, in even more concrete ways, building on this for competencies and skills. We're then going to have time after lunch for more small group interactive discussions. We're really eager to have you begin to share more with one another in a more informal, conversational way. But I also would encourage you at the break, while you're chatting, relax, enjoy, meet people. But I also would welcome those of you with one another, with me, with us, to say, what have you learned? What's something you heard that validates or underscores something that helps you, you came in with? Or what's something that's pushed your thinking? Or something you think is being missing? And I just look forward to the interaction at the breaks as well as in the sessions to come. But with that, these are 3 amazing leaders, thinkers, and panelists. Let's give a huge thank you to this panel: Steve, Gerald, Ralph,